Hello, and thank you for joining us. I am here with Hillary Wright, registered dietitian and director for nutrition counseling at the Domar Center for Mind Body Health at Boston IVF. And Hillary, that's one of the oldest IVF clinics in the state, isn't it?
It's one of the oldest in the country, and it's the fourth largest in the United States as far as I know. We have a very large network. We're all over the place, actually, increasingly across the country. So, yeah.
Very cool. So you have seen a lot of patients looking to conceive and a lot of women dealing with PCOS in your practice. And in fact, you are so experienced in the subject of polycystic ovarian syndrome that you wrote a book in 2010, The PCOS Diet Plan, A Natural Approach to Health for Women with Polycystic Ovarian Syndrome. And you recently just re-released a new edition here in 2017. So if you haven't been able to read this book yet, I highly recommend that you go to Amazon right now and order Hillary's new edition that's got a lot of valuable information in it that we're going to talk about right here. So Hillary, we were talking a little bit on the phone about kind of your journey into this area because you yourself do not have PCOS, but you ended up becoming someone who was counseling a lot of women with PCOS. Can you tell us how that kind of came about for you?
Yeah, it's really interesting because it sort of emerged from one of the most painful experiences of my life, which was dealing with what's called secondary infertility. So I had my first son, who's now 25 almost. And then when trying to conceive my second son, it just wasn't happening. So I was working at a large group medical practice in Boston at that time called Harvard Vanguard Medical Associates as a nutritionist. So I was getting my health care there, and the OBGYN suggested I go speak to a reproductive endocrinologist to get my hormones tested and do all the stuff that you do in that workup. So fortunately, with some minor hormonal tweaking, I was able to conceived my second son, and then actually had a surprise third one because I made some, I made some assumptions about my fertility. But having gone through that process, I had the hysterosalpingogram, which a lot of people are familiar with who've gone through a fertility workup where they inject dye into your fallopian tubes. I've had endometrial biopsies. I've had, all of these really emotionally, as well as sometimes painful procedures associated with that. So after my son was born, I came back from maternity leave in February of 2000. This doctor, so we were practicing on the same roof, and she said, "I want you to see my patients with PCOS." And I had absolutely no idea what she was talking about. So I went online and I looked around, and the only other RD, registered dietitian I found at that time was Martha McKittrick, who's still very active in the PCOS world. And I reached out to her, and, as Martha is Martha, she couldn't have been more gracious in sharing with me what she knew at that point. But I also went out and bought this book that is basically a textbook on PCOS called PCOS, The Hidden Epidemic by Samuel Thatcher, which, people read my books and think they're somewhat science-dense. This thing was a beast, but it really helped me to understand PCOS. So that was in 2000. So now at this point, I've seen hundreds of women with this condition. I've seen, teenagers, women past menopause, women trying to conceive, women without any interest in having children at the moment, but would like to have a handle on their hormones, knowing that PCOS presents some potential challenges. So, it's just strange how life works. This thing that was really brutal to go through kind of evolved into this place where I could have, an empathy for these women that had this condition that leads them to be dealing with things that I experienced myself. So, yeah, it was kind of strange, but fortuitous, I guess. Meant to be, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a very heroic story, right? You took something that was a dark spot in your life and used it for a tool for good. I run into so many women who, one of their big complaints is the lack of empathy they're getting from the healthcare provider, because they don't really understand PCOS or what it's like to be in that position. And you really do, from a personal experience, you took that and you used it and turned it into a skill, really, to help other people. So that's awesome. What a wonderful
and the
story.
other thing, too, that was kind of a crossroads between the two was I have 5 brothers and sisters, and two of my brothers have type 1 diabetes, which is not, there may be some connections between PCOS and type 1 diabetes, but the major form of diabetes that women with PCOS are at risk for is type 2. I have multiple first-degree relatives with type 2 diabetes, so I know that I'm at risk of it myself. So I know a lot about diabetes, and the world knows a lot about diabetes, which means we know a lot about insulin resistance. It's just that it plays out in this unique way in women with polycystic ovary syndrome. And, one of the things I try to help women understand by reading these books is this thing that we call insulin resistance was actually a good thing to have throughout most of history. It was protective against starvation. So years ago, I had a really kind of upset woman call me, and she said, I know nothing about PCOS except for my doctor told me I'd be more likely to have kids back in the Stone Age. And that
I was told that too.
It
did not make me happy at that moment.
Right, exactly. But it's a self-preserving gene. Like, with this genetic tendency, you're more likely to not starve to death during famines. But, it's definitely now a mismatch condition, like most chronic conditions are mismatched between genetic expectations, evolution, and then an environment that's really kind of toxic to that predisposition now.
Right. And you bring up a really good point there. And I think I just want to point this out. There's kind of a paradigm shift here. Instead of thinking there's something wrong with my body and with me, maybe there's something wrong with your environment and your lifestyle. And that's good news because you can change that.
Correct. It's kind of learning. The goal of the book was to help women learn how to work with their genetics as opposed to the default in our environment, which works against them. And I think those principles apply to everything from weight loss, reducing your risk of heart disease and cancer and keeping your brain healthy. It's all the same. Our body has certain expectations about what the environment, the food supply, levels of physical activity are going to be like. Mm-hmm. And we're kind of now plopped into this world where that's not really how it goes.
No, it's not. I can definitely relate to that when I switched from being online to a person working in the gym all of the time. It was a big shift in the level of physical activity. I had to adjust my nutrition accordingly.
Right.
You briefly mentioned insulin resistance, and I think that this is still an area where most women know it has something to do with their PCOS, but they just don't understand what and how and why. Can you kind of just give us a layperson's explanation on how to visualize that or understand insulin resistance as it relates to PCOS?
Okay. So insulin resistance is a hormonal condition that occurs on a spectrum. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, it was formerly a positive tendency to have because it regulated fuel metabolism in the body to make our body very conservative with how it uses nutrients, namely mostly carbohydrates. So insulin resistance, if you think of it like an umbrella condition under which there are many manifestations of it, type 2 diabetes being the big one, PCOS, this other thing called metabolic syndrome, which I talk about in the book, gestational diabetes. Pregnancy makes women naturally insulin resistant. So if you go into a pregnancy with a little insulin resistance already, you're at higher risk of gestational diabetes. But also preeclampsia, which is a very serious complication of pregnancy, pregnancy-induced hypertension, those all fall under this umbrella. So insulin is a hormone that is produced by your pancreas, that its major job is after you eat, mainly carbohydrates, is to escort the glucose or the blood sugar from those carbohydrates out of your blood and into your cells. So in order for that to happen, your cells have to be receptive to this hormone insulin when it comes knocking on the door.
Right.
So insulin resistance, as I said, occurs in a spectrum. Anybody with type 2 diabetes has a period of years prior to that we would call that prediabetes. That is insulin resistance that has not yet progressed to the point of being type 2 diabetes. But everybody with prediabetes has a period of years where they're insulin resistant, but their pancreas is youthful and energetic enough to compensate for it. The problem is there are no great tests for insulin and insulin resistance in the pre-diabetes phase. Sometimes people have fasting insulin levels, and I talk about that in the book. The problem with the fasting insulin level is it's not a standardized test. So sometimes they are whoppingly abnormal, but by not being a standardized test, what I mean is if you go into any lab in the United States and get a fasting glucose test or a lipid profile, a cholesterol profile, you'll basically get the same test and the same normal ranges. That's not the case with fasting insulin.
Really?
So if we think about how insulin works, so you eat your carbohydrates, within about an hour they show up as sugar in your blood as glucose. The blood with the glucose in it is going to circulate through your pancreas, which is that organ that makes insulin, and your pancreas is going to secrete out and throw out into your blood what it thinks should be enough insulin to run around and unlock all your cells to let the sugar out of your blood and into your cells. So if people are insulin resistant, it means the receptor, which is kind of like the keyhole on the cell, is sort of numb to the action of insulin. So if your pancreas secreted out what it thought should be enough insulin to unlock all your cells and sweep the sugar out of your blood, but then on a retest, your pancreas says, you know what, those sugars aren't going down as fast as I would like. What do you think your pancreas is going to do then? It's going to throw more insulin out into your blood. So now, in the early stages, your pancreas is youthful and energetic enough that it has plenty of reserve to just make more insulin, to overwhelm the cells, kind of, bash down the door, get the blood sugar regulated. But it's at the expense of taxing your pancreas and making it work harder than it has to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does make sense. So kind of what you're saying is that insulin resistance is in a spectrum. And in the beginning, there's always this period of time before you become diabetic or you become clinically insulin resistant that you are dealing with this problem. It doesn't you don't wake up one morning and you are this way. So
correct.
That's I think a really important point. I would send this home because Hillary said to me before on this call, there is no good test for insulin resistance before you get kind of into that diabetic range. Is that correct? Did I quote you right?
Right. So by the time somebody starts to test for pre-diabetes, which is the phase before diabetes, unfortunately we're going to be getting better at screening that. But before somebody even hits that point, it could be that they've reduced their pancreas's ability to even make insulin by 50% or more.
Wow.
So by the time you're pre-diabetic, you've been insulin resistant for probably a long time. It's just that the blood sugar tests don't go abnormal until your pancreas has really taken a hit. Having said that, right up to diabetes doorway, you can reverse that in most cases by following the same therapies sort of outlined in this book. In fact, I actually turned it over into a different book called the Pre-Diabetes Diet Plan because a lot of it is the same. It's managing insulin resistance. But the challenge is then you have to look at, okay, if there's no great test for this, no foolproof test for insulin resistance, you have to go on risk factors. So we believe that anybody with a body mass index over 30, regardless of PCOS status, probably has some degree of insulin resistance, which is why being overweight raises your risk for diabetes.
Okay.
PCOS is a risk factor for insulin, it's got insulin resistance, we think, present in at least 70% of cases of PCOS. Now, I don't know why it's not 100, and I don't know what the differences are. I think we are increasingly aware that we're not just dealing with one thing with PCOS. There are likely variants of it and stuff we just don't understand because, it's underfunded and we need more research and blah, blah, blah. We could go there for a long time.
Yes, we could.
Yes, but if somebody has a family history of diabetes, though, you don't have to have a family history of diabetes to get type 2 diabetes. That's very clear.
Yes.
But PCOS insulin resistance is present irrespective of weight. So there's this thing that people think, unless you're really overweight, particularly you have like a lot of weight around the middle, a lot of facial hair, acne, losing the hair on the top of your head, you don't have PCOS. Like that's what's happening in a lot of clinical encounters with women trying to get diagnosed. I've seen very thin, fit women with no periods and facial hair. So, so therefore they are at risk of diabetes. Are they as high a risk of diabetes as a PCOS woman who's overweight and sedentary? No, they're not. But this concept that PCOS, you have to have all those typical trademarks, likely emerges from the fact that if you are overweight and sedentary, you're probably more vulnerable to the influence of our kind of obesogenic environment if you have this condition. And then you're going to be more symptomatic. So what do you do then? You're more likely to go to the doctor, and you're more likely to end up in a research study. So sometimes the women with PCOS who have the hardest time getting anybody to pay attention to them are the thin ones, because people don't believe you can be insulin resistant and thin. So that's why it's all over the place in terms of degrees of severity, how it manifests itself. But we do know that diet and lifestyle is the primary way to manage it.
Okay, so irrespective of what size you are right now, if you're a woman that has been diagnosed with PCOS, you are at risk for insulin resistance.
Correct.
Okay, I think everybody who's listening out there should really take that message to heart, because I know that there's a lot of confusion out there about whether or not, if you're lean, if you have insulin resistance, and you should be concerned about it. And what Hillary pointed out is it's a heck of a lot easier to deal with a small problem than to wait till you're highly symptomatic and turn back this insulin resistance. So going back to kind of the concepts here with insulin resistance, then we know it's on a spectrum. We know that PCOS is already a risk factor for it, regardless of your weight. And basically, when you are insulin resistant, your pancreas is going to produce more and more insulin in order to get that blood sugar where it needs to go, because your body will always get the job done if it can.
Right.
Now,
nicely said, Erica. Good job.
Thank you. I always try to repeat things. I'm a repeater of information to make sure I understood I got it. It's actually something I learned when I was living in countries where I was speaking a different language. I would always repeat it back to them to make sure I understood the message, and it's a very useful tool. So to me, endocrinology is a different language, so I always repeat back.
Yep.
So now we got an idea of why insulin resistance is a present issue in PCOS. How does that, I guess, trickle down into the ovaries and our testosterone and androgens? How does that all kind of come together? Could you explain that a little bit?
So lately I've taken to explaining this by trying to get people to look at their endocrine systems as planets in a solar system.
Okay.
You know, they're supposed to orbit around each other, your thyroid function, your adrenal glands, your blood sugar regulation, your reproductive hormones. So they sort of orbit around each other, and sometimes they assist each other. But in PCOS, there's a tendency for them to crash into each other, because endocrinology, these different systems don't operate in a vacuum. So if we look at what is required for normal ovulation around day 14 in a timely manner, when the lining of your uterus is all what we call in phase, ready to receive a fertilized embryo to implant, it's like a miracle of nature, God, like whatever you believe in. It's just extraordinary that it goes off as often as it does, because it requires a high degree of timing accuracy. So ovulation, basically think of it like hormonal communication between your ovaries, your hypothalamus, and your pituitary gland. It's called the ovarian hypothalamic pituitary axis. Think of it like Morse code that has to go around and around to get an egg in line to go through all this hormonal maturation to land in a follicle around day 14, ripe and ready for conception.
Wow. And just to clear things up, the hypothalamus is in your brain.
Yep.
Where your ovaries are.
And your pituitary's up there too.
In the pituitary, right? Yeah. And then you have your
it's
thyroid.
Like your head and your ovaries, kind of communicating back and forth. So if you are to some degree secreting more insulin than is ideal, you know, and insulin resistance is primarily an issue with muscle cells, because they are the biggest consumers of glucose. And again, it actually evolved from a favorable hormone place, from starvation prevention. You know, if your clan was going through a famine and you were at risk of starving to death, and your muscles were gobbling up all your carbohydrates because they're such big glucose hogs, well, then your brain wouldn't get what it needs, and your brain is the most important organ in your body. So the body learned, under conditions of physiologic stress, which I walk through all the stuff in my book because I think it's helpful for people to understand.
Yes.
Which back then was risk of starving, injury, or infection. The body learned to make the muscles insulin resistant, to preserve extra glucose in circulation to fuel the brain and the immune system if you had an infection. So even though that's all kind of going on in your muscle cells, primarily, though you have insulin resistance in other organs as well, ovaries are really sensitive to the effects of insulin. And that makes sense because ovaries make eggs that make people. They need a lot of fuel.
Right.
So if you have this other blood glucose regulating kind of hormonal abnormality going on that is triggering your pancreas to secrete extra insulin, well, that insulin's going everywhere and it's going to touch everything. And it can basically throw a wrench into your reproductive hormones. Mm-hmm. So when we say polycystic appearing ovaries, they're not like cysts like we've all heard, like, oh, my friend's girlfriend had a cyst the size of a grapefruit on her ovary. It's not that. They're follicles that start down that maturation process in your ovary, and then the hormones get dysregulated, and the maturation stops. So then another one tries, and another one tries, and another one tries, and now you've got these bumpy-looking ovaries, but they're not shooting out the other side.
Right.
So it's glucose regulation crashing into hormonal communication that regulates reproductive function. The other thing, too, is that the follicles that these eggs travel in to mature, mm-hmm. they're lined with these cells called theca cells. It's THECA. When theca cells are overexposed to insulin, they increase their production of testosterone. Ah. So now you have this hormone. You know, all women have some testosterone. I go out of my way to tell my patients this does not make you any less of a girl.
Yes,
you know,
amen.
All men have some estrogen, all women have some testosterone. But higher levels than ideal of testosterone in women can cause androgen-like symptoms, which we all know and love to hate.
Yes.
Facial hair, you know, on the chest and the back and the abdomen, you know, thinning of the hair in a male pattern, you know, a tendency to have more acne and accrue fat around the middle. So locally, it can kind of muck around with your reproductive hormones, but systemically, it starts to cause a lot of these symptoms that if we travel all the way back, where's ground zero with this insulin resistance? It's back here at your blood sugar regulation, which is mostly influenced by your carbohydrate intake and your physical activity. So what I try to do in my books is help people understand this is how it works. So you can have a visual that if I make this food choice versus that food choice, if I'm physically active or not, and I'm also really big, I touch on it a little bit in the book, I'm really big into circadian rhythms. I've been telling people for 25 years, I don't know what it is, but when people don't eat enough during the day and overeat at night, it makes it easier to gain weight, and it appears to make it harder to lose. And we now have a sense that a large percentage of the population, based on a talk that I went to, he said over 50%, likely have a tendency to be more insulin sensitive in the morning and more insulin resistant at night. So that's the American way, right? We don't have time for breakfast. We don't eat enough during the day. Then it blows up in our face at 4 or 5. We're eating a lot of food, including carbs at night, which might mean we need to make even more insulin than we would have if we ate them earlier in the day, just based on the insulin resistance. So this is not easy stuff, but they are very solid principles that people can try to adopt over time with patience. This isn't dieting.
Yes.
It's trying to take a set of lifestyle habits that may not be serving you well and look at it like a flight of stairs that at the top, your default habits are managing your underlying insulin resistance. Okay. That's the place where you're more likely to lose weight and increase your fertility.
And that's where we want to be. Regardless of what your fertility journey is right now, you want to be in a healthy place where that's possible, just because that's when you're going to feel your best. So even if that's not what you're thinking about right now, it still matters. I wanted to kind of highlight that right there. Because some people ask me, I don't want to get pregnant. Do I need to worry about this? And I'm like, well, yeah, you're still supposed to be doing these things in your body. So we have this solar system of hormones. And the insulin resistance gets us out of orbit. So we know that now. And now, what can we do with our environment, with our lifestyle, to make that orbit run smoothly again so that all our planets are doing what they're supposed to be doing? And one phrase that I love that you use in your book again and again is you talk about quality and quantity of your foods is going to affect this hormonal orbit. So tell us more about that.
Okay. So we all hear that carbohydrates are the enemy now for everything. They're blamed for everything.
Everything.
But the reality is carbohydrates are the primary fuel for the human body. So human brains demand carbohydrates, basically, and your brain is what regulates your food cravings and certain desires for food and so forth and so on. So even though carbohydrates are the primary source of glucose in your blood, so when you eat carbohydrates, it takes about 60 or 90 minutes for them to break down into sugar in your blood. The ultimate volume of how much sugar is in your blood will be dictated by how big was that amount of food that you ate. Mm. So quantity is going to dictate ultimately how much sugar is in your blood and how much insulin you're going to secrete. But the quality dictates largely how fast that sugar gets into your blood, which we often refer to as the glycemic index or the glycemic load. But also, what other nutritional attributes does that food have?
Right.
Some of which can temper how fast your blood sugar rises and how full you feel when eating. So, for example, natural carbohydrates that come from whole food sources, fruits, vegetables, whole grains. So that means breads, crackers, you see the word ingredients, and in that first ingredient is the word whole. Whole wheat, whole multigrain, whole oats, whatever. We know that dietary fiber is not digestible by humans. You have to be a ruminant like a goat and have 4 stomachs to break it down. We only have one, so that means during digestion, if what you're eating is a whole foods-based carbohydrate, the fiber in there, your digestion will have to contend with it. Sort of sift through the fiber and untangle the sugar and the other nutrients. So your blood sugar will go up more gradually. If you then also pair that quality carbohydrate with protein and healthy fat, both of those slow down the rate at which food leaves your stomach and enters your intestines, and it's in your intestines where the sugar is absorbed. So that's where the balanced plate approach that I primarily focus on in the book comes from. Decent amount of plants, including whole grains, is about 1/4 of your plate, a third maybe if somebody's really active. Adequate protein to fill you up and kind of complicate the digestion. But, there are so many studies on the advantages of eating a lot of plant foods, fruits, vegetables, and whole grains. So studies tell us that whole grain intake correlates with a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. That means it's not toxic to insulin resistance. Mm-hmm. It's about the quantity. So, anybody who eats like a 12-inch sub, a bag of chips, and a Coke for lunch is going to have an extraordinarily high amount of sugar in their blood now later. But if you have a couple pieces of whole grain bread, say, that's maybe 70 calories a slice. So not these giant things about as big as your head. You have some protein in there, and you have some plants with it. Lettuce and tomato on it, salad on the side, whole fruits. All of those things are playing a really important function towards helping you feel full and muting that post-meal glucose bump, which is going to dictate what then happens with your insulin. But the majority of studies that tell us that eating a lot of fruits and vegetables and whole grains is associated with a lower risk of a lot of diseases. In all likelihood, it's largely related to the phytonutrients more than anything else. So yes, the fiber is important. The vitamins and minerals are important. The fact that fruits and vegetables are mostly water makes them lower in calories. Plant foods are loaded with thousands of chemicals that act as natural antioxidants and anti-inflammatories and detoxifiers, all of which are potential players in PCOS. So I know when I meet with a client who just really feels out of control with eating, but they like a decent number of fruits and a pretty decent amount of vegetables, I know that that's going to be easier than somebody who basically decided when I was very young I didn't like vegetables and now I don't eat them. That's going to be a tough journey because you have to fill up with something. So, I try to, I always tell people, and even at my job at the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute, the American Institute for Cancer Research has this thing called the New American Plate that looks pretty much just like this. There is a lot of science embedded in these simple visuals. It's that, though people eat food and they eat off plates, they don't eat retinol equivalents in international units and micrograms.
No, I haven't done that yet.
So it's a synergistic effect. All of these things kind of synergistically, quality of the diet, quantity of the carbohydrates, eating pattern. How are you spreading your food out? Are you doing it so that your blood sugars and your insulin levels are rolling? Or are you not making time to eat and then consuming all your calories late in the day, which is probably changing your metabolism in terms of how you might otherwise, break those things down. So there's a lot involved, but if you really look at it, like the feedback I've gotten from both of my books is people like, shouldn't everybody be eating like this? I'm like, yes, everybody should be. But you just have this extra incentive when you have PCOS, and I believe understanding food choices, and of course the activity piece, which I'm sure we'll get to, hugely important to naturally kind of helping you work with your genetic tendencies to get insulin to settle down and get out of the way of your fertility and your weight loss efforts.
Okay. So what I'm hearing from you is that, first of all, the PCOS kind of gives you an added, more urgent incentive to start eating healthy the way we all should be eating, and that there's no monster under the bed or the closet in our pantry that's creating this insulin resistance state. It's about looking at the quality of my food. So are my foods the kind of foods that come from the ground that I could draw a picture of and know what the plant form was? Those are the kind of foods that are going to have the phytonutrients that we don't even know yet how that plays into PCOS and health in general in a lot of cases. But it's also going to be the kind of food that takes a little bit longer to digest so that we don't have this insulin resistance issue, which seems to kind of put gasoline on the fire of PCOS. So we're putting out those flames. And the nice thing is we don't even know what the other health benefits are to eating like this in some cases. There's all kinds of different benefits. And one of my favorite is you don't feel as hungry. Because PCOS and that kind of like, I just ate, but I still feel hungry. It was almost like my hunger when I really didn't have a handle on my diet was stalking me. It was constant presence. And now that I eat basically the plate that you outline in your book, I just eat and I'm not hungry till my next normal meal time, which is so freeing because I feel like there's a lot of people, a lot of women, especially with PCOS, dealing with this kind of just unrelenting sort of craving, hunger, energy crash thing. And that's really just the insulin resistance.
Yeah, there's a point I always like to make when talking about insulin, and that is this is a hormone that has a long job description. So what we're talking about here is insulin as a glucose regulator. But insulin is responsible for not wasting fuel. Again, that's that anti-starvation hormone genetic tendency. So insulin will take as much glucose out of your blood and shove it into your cells to whatever degree it can take it on. But these days we tend to eat more carbs than we need based on our not very active lifestyles relative to how humans mostly live. So the insulin will then say, okay, there's still too much glucose in this blood, and too much glucose and too much insulin are both pro-inflammatory compounds. So, that's where a lot of the inflammation comes from. Your body will then take some of the glucose and try to pack it into your glycogen stores, which is stored glucose. I think of it like little sugar cubes in your muscles and in your liver that are there to be crumbled and thrown into your bloodstream so you never get dangerously hypoglycemic, and you have fuel for anaerobic activity, sprints and all that stuff that you're more familiar with than I am, I'm sure. But there's still too much glucose exposure in our blood than is healthy. So the insulin will then say, okay, I got to store this away in another form for a rainy day in case I hit a famine again. It will take that glucose, convert it into triglycerides, which is fat, and store it in your fat stores. And in particular, likes to store it around your middle. We call this visceral adipose tissue. The problem is having a lot of fat in that area aggravates insulin resistance. So it becomes like a cycle. The good news is it's easier to lose that kind of fat once you start exercising and eating healthfully than it is to lose the fat that's in your butt and your thighs, which is a healthier fat pattern anyway. But the other last two things I want to say about insulin, once it packs the triglycerides into your fat stores, it literally stands outside your body fat like a guard, and it says, I'm keeping the fat, you can't have it. So your body wants to make sure that fat's being put to really good use before it lets it go, which again was important if you were a cave person.
Right.
But when people are trying to lose weight and they're not doing it in a way, for example, that is also trying to get those insulin levels down, they start to get frustrated, like, I'm counting calories, you know, the math is working, which we know weight loss is not just about math, but I'm not losing weight. So you have to get your insulin levels down in order to allow your body to liberate its fat stores. That's why it's so important to start eating earlier in the day and to have your food intake, if anything, hopefully kind of temper out a little bit, because when your insulin levels are low at night when you're fasting, you may be more able to liberate some of that body fat. But that's not how we eat. We skew our food to the evening because we don't prioritize eating as important for lots of reasons. And now when you're sleeping, you may be flooded with growth hormones, which is what insulin is, fat-protecting hormones, not transitioning to a state where you can liberate your fat. Does that make sense?
That does make sense. So insulin not only will help you acquire that adipose tissue, but high insulin levels will help you keep it there because your body doesn't know that you're not starving. And by taking more aggressive approaches with your dieting, by maybe just counting calories and not looking at the whole picture, and especially not looking at this issue of timing. So maybe I used to do this for years, even after I became a personal trainer, and I really didn't understand my nutrition as well as I should have. I would really kind of hold on to my calories all day, and then I look forward to getting out of the gym, taking a shower, sitting down, and having this big meal, and then I'd have to go to bed early because I started work at 6 a.m. So even though I was at a healthy weight, I had lost most of my initial weight from PCOS, I remember that this hunger thing was like a presence in my life. And looking back on it, and just with your explanation, I can see how that sort of reverse diet, I'm going against my natural rhythms, is creating that conflict in my body.
And the last thing I should say about insulin is it is a hunger hormone. It's designed to make you hungry. It's designed to say, wow, the carbs which I need for function weren't available earlier, but now they're available now. So you eat the carbs, your insulin levels go up. Well, what's insulin's job? It's to lower your blood sugar. So when you eat a carbohydrate, particularly the refined stuff that doesn't have the fiber or its natural nutrients, when you take the fiber off of a grain, you throw out all those phytonutrients and the vitamins and the minerals as well, because the germ gets stripped off along with the fiber. But now you have very little standing between your carbohydrates and your digestive enzymes. It's helpful to think of processing carbohydrates as pre-digesting them. There's that much less work your body has to do on the inside to finish it off and spike your blood sugar. Right. So if you whole grain flour to white flour, brown rice to white rice, whole fruit to juice, there's less work involved in spiking your blood sugar. The faster your blood sugar goes up, the faster your insulin level climbs up after it, and the faster it's going to knock your blood sugar down. When your blood sugar goes down on the low side, your brain, which is the most important organ in the body, very sensitive to glucose fluctuations, is going to start to react. And we all know what that feels like. Yes. Hangry. Hungry, angry, almost like shaky. Oh, I just feel unsettled, and there's this overwhelming sense that if I just eat, I'll feel better. The problem is there tends to be an overreaction to that. And if meaning you're over hungry, so now you're going to reactively overeat. So I talk about all this food distribution stuff in the book. You're not going to win under that condition.
No, of course not.
If you go too long without eating, if you over-restrict your carbohydrates so your brain feels deprived, if you're eating too much refined carbohydrates, like get rid of the Cheez-Its and the Nutri-Grain bars, and occasionally, I don't care. I'm not, I talk about the 80-20 approach in my book all the time. I don't care what you do 20% of the time, but try to eat food that has a chance of not just nourishing you, but sticking with you for a while. Because the slower your blood sugar goes up, the slower it comes down, and the longer it's going to be before you're hungry. But if we just put out fires with too much refined carbohydrate, your blood sugar and your insulins are doing this mountain and valley thing, not this nice rolling hills thing. Mm-hmm. And the problem there, too, is that now the woman with PCOS feels like, I am a loser. I am addicted to carbohydrates. I cannot control myself. And I had a patient say to me recently, a woman with PCOS who is in her mid-40s, and she never was able to have children earlier, and she's kind of moved on at this point. But when she first came to me, that was totally her thing. I come home and I am just dying for carbs and sugar. And she, after some of the work we've done together, we've met a few times, she came in recently and said, I have to tell you, I am nowhere near as hungry as I was before. And I never thought that was possible. Not for me, because I'm a carb addict. Not for me, because I'm a sugar addict. When really, she was sort of unknowingly teeing up this reactive overeating at night by not really understanding what was happening earlier in the day.
Wow, so you brought to light a couple of important things. So I want to kind of encapsulate what you said about dieting, or I shouldn't say dieting, about a nutrition approach to PCOS that makes you feel great. And that was that starting with breakfast, and don't be shy about sitting down and eating a real breakfast, old school from a plate, that you should be looking for a plate that's got about 50% produce, veggies, fruits, a quarter protein, and a quarter whole quality grains. At least 80% of the time, you want to be looking for those unrefined carbohydrates that look old-fashioned, is the way I look at them.
Yeah.
And by starting out that way and not doing what I did and squirreling your calories away till after work at the end of the day, and focusing on getting those calories when your brain really needs them, right, at work when you're trying to be your awesome Wonder Woman self, and sort of tapering off so that you can have maybe a lighter dinner that, again, is following that same plate format, you're going to get a better insulin response. And more importantly, almost to me personally, is you might be able to uncuff yourself from that rampant hunger, craving, carb cycle, which really is a physiological experience. But a lot of women I know come to me, and it sounds like they come to you, feeling like that this physiology that's driving their eating behaviors and causing them to make decisions they know aren't the best for them, they feel like it's a reflection on their character and,
right. Yes.
Their willpower. And that's a terrible feeling. And it's not necessarily true. It really isn't true in my experience. And that's something I think that you did a great job of describing in your book. But I wanted to send home to everybody that there's a way to stop this physiological experience. But if you are experiencing it, it's not because you're lazy or you're a glutton or you don't care. We know you care.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's, I talk a lot about proactive eating, in my book, like don't wait till you're starved. So I talk about, a hunger scale where there's a lot of different hunger scales, but the one I talk about in the book is if 1 is not hungry, like how you feel right after a satisfying meal, and 10 is starved. Research tells us people are more likely to be mindful eaters, like let me think about this for a second, let me think about the choice I'm making, hopefully eat in a reasonable pace so that you stop when you're maybe full but not stuffed. Mm-hmm. If we don't let our hunger get beyond a 5 or a 6. But too often we wait, we are too busy, and we're at an 8 or a 10, and then your primitive cave girl instinct is going to tell you to go out, kill an antelope, and eat the whole thing. You are not going to win the battle of your willpower, with which we have very little. Humans did not evolve to be ignorant about food, and our good intentions, I want to eat better. These things can help you over the bumps if you're working from a plan, but they're going to get flattened if your cave girl is let out of the cave because you're not paying attention to your hunger. So to your point, I think that eating a good breakfast is important, A, because you probably may be more insulin sensitive in the morning. It tends to set the tone for the day. So the balanced plate breakfast is a little different from the lunch and the dinner, in that it's about a third, a third, a third. So that could be like whole grain toast with peanut butter and a piece of fruit, or an egg with whole grain toast and a fruit. Or people eat vegetables at breakfast in other parts of the world. It's just not how we typically do it here. It could be Greek yogurt with fruit in it and nuts, and So I give a lot of actual where the rubber hits the road examples of exactly breakfast, lunches, and dinners and snacks that have protein. And I try to make it as easy as possible. I have a shopping list that's got some general principles about a category and then tells you by brand name, I'm telling you I just stood in the supermarket for 3 hours, and these are the national brands that I found that fit the bill. So, but, you know, there's this old thing that says breakfast like a king, lunch like a queen, dinner like a pauper. I don't think it, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be that, but the point is you want to try to proactively eat when your hunger is like halfway to starved, which for many people, breakfast to lunch is closer together, but lunch to dinner is pretty far apart.
Yeah.
You know, when I was a kid growing up, you know, I'm a lot older than most women with dealing with, you know, reproductive PCOS things right now, but we ate dinner at like 5 o'clock. Nobody does that anymore.
Oh, no.
So like a well-spaced carb protein snack of quality foods to kind of keep your blood sugar in play so you don't dump, you know, by the time you get home, and then you're eating before dinner, and then you're eating too much dinner, and then you're eating after dinner. It's the skewed eating pattern. So I've seen people just say, you know, initially I'm like, I have much more realistic expectations for my clients than they do for themselves, because many of them I'm trying to talk them out of dieting.
Right.
But I would say just spread your food out more. Start earlier. You know what? Could be as simple as bringing a protein-containing snack, a carb protein snack. The carbs to buoy your blood sugar up, and the protein and the fat maybe to, you know, to kind of drag out the digestion. Start there. And then exercise. You know, I mean, 100 years ago, diabetes was a rich person's disease. You know, there was many reasons for that. One of them is that physical activity is the most natural way to chemically sensitize your cells to the action of insulin. Because when you're inside our cells are these glucose transporter proteins called GLUT4. Their job is once the insulin unlocks the cell, the transporter proteins pick up the ball and start yanking the sugar out of the blood. So it's supposed to be like a partnership. But the trigger for the production of those proteins is physical activity, which is why anybody with diabetes will tell you, if I test my blood sugar and I go for a walk and I test it again, my blood sugar is significantly down. Muscles are like big glucose sponges. You know, they have high glucose requirements. So physical activity is an expectation of our genes.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
It is not in the genetic playbook that we were born with to sit around at computers all day long. It's extremely toxic to the body. So, you know, by far, if a woman with PCOS is overweight, the most natural way to sensitize her cells to insulin is to lose weight. But research tells us losing as little as 5 to 10% of your weight can be meaningful enough weight loss to make you more responsive to assisted reproduction like IVF, for example, even if you still weigh a lot more than you want to weigh long term. But because of that, it's really not an optional thing. But none of these things work in a vacuum. I mean, you've probably heard there's a lot of studies that suggest exercise alone is not enough for people to lose weight.
No, it's
or
not.
They may lose a little bit and then they hit that plateau because the food has the bigger influence, because it's so easy to undo the exercise calories with food. But that's why I get frustrated with too much people blaming individual foods as being good or bad, because individual foods don't have the ability to fix your health or collapse all your good intentions by single exposures. That's why I do the 80-20 thing. You know, I don't care what people do 20% of the time. I'm interested in your habits. If you want to be better and say, I'm the 90-10 person, fine. Can't be 100, because now you're being orthorexic and obsessed. And
yes,
it's not,
and you're no fun to eat out with.
You're no fun. And it's giving food too much power.
Yes.
Because if you eat something that's not like the perfect thing for your blood sugar insulin resistance, whatever happens with your internal body thing, it's over within a few hours. It can only like blow up and turn into your, you know, the thing that like sends you into the ditch if you emotionally build it up and say, oh my God, I was doing so good, then I ate that food. And that was it. That was all the evidence I needed that I am not worthy of this. I'm not capable. I'm going to quit. And that's what I call, and I put that in this book too, is because I started talking to people about this. It's the Z curve of failure, which is you get going on the plan, you hit a lapse, which is inevitable. Lapses are opportunities to learn. They're not evidence of failure, but you put a lot of emotional, you know, oh my God, I can't believe I did that. And then you slide into the ditch and you quit. And you stay there until the perfect Monday comes around after a weekend of Last Supper eating, and you go after the next diet. The people who lose weight and keep it off, as evidenced by the National Weight Control Registry, Their journey looks like an EKG. They get going, they hit lapses, they problem solve, they pick themselves up. Did something happen that could be changed? I ate out too much this week. I guess that means I need to make sure I shop on Sunday, whatever it is, and they get back in the saddle. And then they lapse again and they pick themselves up, and they lapse again and they pick themselves up. But they continue moving forward as opposed to spinning through the Z curve of failure. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I think, I know like in coaching, in my coaching practice, we call that the growth mindset. So you can look at, all foods on a spectrum. Let's say you make a choice on the not so great spectrum. You can look at that as a failure and a reflection on who you are as a person, and really get down on yourself. And that's a very real and painful experience. If you're going through that, I feel for you because I've been there too. Or you can say, all right, like this didn't go the way I would love it to have gone. What can I learn about it? And what this is the National Weight Registry, just real quickly, is just a long-term study on people who have lost weight and have kept it off for the long term. And it looked at all these different kinds of factors. But one that you pointed out in your book is this growth mindset, this ability to take our missteps and look at them as opportunities to learn and grow, and not as a reason to be hard on yourself or to give yourself this story that you're never going to succeed just because you ate white bread on your sandwich at the airport. So I think that's incredibly valuable because otherwise you're not eating healthy. You're on this punitive sort of diet mentality, and it drives a lot of our behaviors around eating to a bad place. So when you're talking about just sort of like mindset in general with dieting versus a nutrition recommendation, I think that there's this deep need or idea kind of in the PCOS community that there has to be this extremely sort of novel or inventive sort of dietary approach to heal our PCOS. And so when women are asked to just start with like these simple sort of eating healthy steps, they don't really buy into the fact that they could possibly work. And I'm wondering if you could just kind of shed some light on that. Like, what does the science say about that? Because that's where our ultimate, fountain of information is when it comes to PCOS.
Right. So when we look at actual dietary patterns in PCOS, there is, and I outline all the studies I could find to suggest what we think is helpful to a lot of people. Ultimately, whatever helps somebody lose weight and keep it off is going to be the best approach for them. But with insulin resistance, carbohydrates are a player, the quality and the quantity. Trying to make sure you eat, enough protein and, perhaps a little more protein, a little more healthy fat to help with the satiety. But ultimately what leads to lasting weight loss is whatever's going to help someone eat less long term. Because anything that you do that's dramatic and you either will not be able to sustain it long term, or you shouldn't because it's not healthy, is not worth embarking on, because it's just going to result in losing weight and regaining it as soon as you go off the plan. So it's not like suffering with weight loss results in like a golden ticket at the end that says, you have suffered, here's your ticket. The weight's not coming back. Like it just got packed up in a trunk and it got shipped to Fiji, It's just in a holding pattern waiting for you to drift back to what you were doing before. So if what you took off doing in the first place was not sustainable, in my mind, it's not worth doing. Is this easy? Absolutely not. I mean, I think that's why journaling is really helpful in whatever form that might take for a person based on their, comfort level with journaling in it on paper or in technology. We're trying to take this thing, being our attraction to food, and put it in our, it's something we're supposed to not pay attention to. Okay, we are supposed to be opportunistic eaters. Our ancestors did not come across a berry bush and contemplate, should I eat this?
Should I eat this?
Yeah, right. We are designed to just eat what we see. The problem is we see too much.
Yes.
So now journaling kind of helps you put it in your face, so you're paying more attention to it, maybe long enough to uproot the habits that weren't so helpful, plant some new ones, fertilize them and water them, to the point where they become your new way of doing things. The problem is that takes a long time. You know, research tells us 12 to 24 weeks or longer, and diets don't last that long. So people suffer, quit, spin their wheels, maybe whack their metabolism by losing weight too fast, losing a lot of muscle. You lose weight fast, you're going to lose a lot of muscle. You don't want to lose your muscle. It's what keeps your metabolism, you know, more active. But it's absolutely not as simple as don't eat this, don't eat that, only eat this. You know, we're a superfoods culture. You know, I had a lengthy talk with a patient of mine at Dana-Farber, a man living with low-grade prostate cancer, and he was overweight and ate way too much and tons of salt and no activity and all this stuff. And so we were trying to get to his default habits. And at the end, he goes, I have one question for you. I'm surprised you didn't say more about blueberries. As if blueberries were going to eliminate the need to address the bigger fish in the sea for him.
Boy, I wish. That would be nice, huh?
So true.
So I want to hit on physical activity because you talked a lot about that real quick. I have always kind of, as I've gone along as a personal trainer, I've developed kind of a hate-hate relationship with the calorie dial on my treadmills and my elliptical trainers. And I think it's because it sends the wrong message. When I've been looking at PCOS and exercise in this context for a long time, and what really gets me excited is not the calories you burn in the gym, but the adaptive and hormonal changes that happen when you begin to work out. Can you sort of give us some of the science on that and how you view that in your nutrition practice?
Yeah. So first of all, we know that those calorie readers are probably not that accurate. Because, you know, as I mentioned before, weight loss is not about math. You know, it's clear that some people may lose more weight and keep it off on a certain type of eating pattern, style, and other people may do differently, likely based on genetics. Mm-hmm. So there is no one way to do things. And when you get on, I mean, when I get on that elliptical machine, I put a magazine on top of that thing because I don't even want to look at it.
Me too.
And I don't put a lot of stock in the numbers. But physical activity, you know, the more active you are and the more of an assist your cells get from those transporter proteins, the less insulin your pancreas is going to have to secrete, which is why studies tell us that people with prediabetes who are physically active, even if they don't lose weight, they're less likely to go on and develop type 2 diabetes.
Wow. Because
it changes your physiology. Like I said, body composition is one of the few cards in our deck that we can use to influence our metabolic rate. Muscles burn more calories, you know, than fat. Sadly, we reach our peak muscle mass probably like 30 plus or minus a few years. And then it's kind of this downward slide unless you continuously push on your muscles.
Yes.
Because they did studies. Tufts University here in Boston did a study years ago at a rehab place where they had 90 and 100-year-old people gaining muscle mass. So you can gain muscle for the entire spectrum of your life. You may need to eat more protein to do it, but you need to exert your muscles. Muscle disuse results in muscle atrophy very, very quickly. And the only way to get your muscles back is to push on them. So somebody may feel like the starting point for me, all I can handle right now is walking. Awesome. The National Weight Control Registry, #1 reported physical activity, walking. But eventually, you really want to roll in some pushing on your muscles activity because that's the trigger that tells your muscle, I need to get bigger. There's exertion, there's pushing, there's energy being thrown at my muscles. When people lose weight, part of what they lose is muscle. So even under the best of circumstances, weight loss, about 25% of what you lose is muscle.
That's significant. That's a lot.
Even the National Weight Control Registry, even the biggest loser people who are like flipping tires and doing all this aggressive muscle work, 17% of the weight they lose is muscle. So, and plus I happen to believe that muscles make life easier on so many levels. I'm also a big advocate of yoga because it's a muscle using activity and it prevents you from getting stiff and it's good for your head.
So relaxing, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't see it as an optional part of the PCOS management program at all. It sometimes is a really good entry point to start with the activity because it may change your mindset in terms of your ability to take control of the food part of your life if you're physically active.
Yes.
But I know myself, sometimes I'll wake up and I just feel tense, and I don't even know why sometimes. And I'll say, okay, I got to go do something. And I'll go out and take a walk or go to the gym or ride my bike or something. And I come back and I don't even remember that something was nagging me. So we all need that stress management piece.
Amen. Yeah, for sure. Well, it's definitely worked for me. I mean, I actually find myself being more agitated if I haven't worked out that day. I'm kind of, I'm obviously a big believer, but it really does affect your mood and your sense of self-efficacy, right? Because you're actually doing something that's positive, and that can kind of snowball. But from what you said from a scientific standpoint, that building that muscle, your body's not going to build muscle just because you want it to. You have to do things that make it say, hey, I need more muscle to live my life. So going out and participating in that physical activity, regardless of how many calories you burn in that individual session, what it's going to do is it's going to make you better equipped to handle that insulin resistance that comes with PCOS, because you're producing the GLUT4 protein, which helps with carbohydrate digestion and metabolism.
It's going to help you all day long, even when you're not exercising.
Yes, all day long. It's not just taking off the time, counting the calories and thinking 100 calories in an hour, that's the worst. But
the effects of that will last for hours after you stop working out.
Yes.
Natural medicine.
It's all about the big picture. Well, I want to thank you so much for just taking the time out to talk to us. And again, go on Amazon and get this book, because if you think you've just learned a lot, you're mistaken. There is so much more in this book. Even for someone like me who's been digging around in the PCOS world looking for information for ages, I learned things, and you can tell it's like totally worn out. I made it look terrible.
I'm so glad.
It's a well-loved book already. So go out and one thing that Hillary said to me was that she believes that women are capable of understanding their bodies and trusting them and learning the science and the things that happen in our bodies that create PCOS, and that we can affect change and educate ourselves. That we're perfectly capable of doing this on our own, and she's given you the tools. She has faith in you that you can make these changes, and she's given you about every tool you could ever need. So I would highly recommend that you go out and purchase this book. And Hillary, could you just, I guess, leave us with if your best friend came to you tomorrow and said that she has PCOS and she's really struggling, what would you say to her to get her going down the right path?
I would say, let's not talk about weight loss. Let's talk about managing insulin resistance, because it will get you where you want to go without hopefully opening up that closet in our head that says dieting on it, that as soon as you open it, all the junk falls in your head. It's paralyzing. So dressing this issue up in a different outfit, I think, is really helpful. So understand that it's not just about the numbers, for example, with weight loss. It's not math. It's about food distribution. So I would say figure out what you have the bandwidth for, kind of one thing to throw your energies at. Is it easier for you out of the gate to focus on the activity piece, to try to manage your stress and get you in touch with your body from the neck down, which may kind of help get you to the point where the food seems more doable? Or what do you think about just trying to eat a decent breakfast every morning, and see what that does in terms of the trajectory of your day? To really focus on single things that over time will accrue. It's frustrating because that takes more time and ongoing attention. But trust me, we've done the diet stuff. It doesn't work.
And you haven't, just ask me, I'll tell you it doesn't work.
Yeah. So, but a lot of times, like I have, copies of my book in my office, and I'll say to people, the front here talks about the stuff we've talked about. But in the back, there's this thing, PCOS diet, making it happen. Like, just go there and pick out some breakfast, lunches, dinners, or snacks. You know what I mean? Like, find a few things that look like acceptable choices to you and try to be a more proactive eater. And, you know, over time you can absorb more of the science. Like, you know, I totally know that this is not easy to understand. I try to do my best. But initially, I just want people to understand that everything else in life we accept is an evolution littered with mistakes. Meaning if you, every time you had a fight with your partner, you got a divorce, so you broke up, you'd constantly be looking for a new person. Yes. If every time, you know, you messed up at work, you quit your job, you'd constantly be looking for a new job. Dieting is about getting perfect, messing up, and quitting. We don't do that anywhere else. So I would just say, understand that it's a process. It's not a diet. Pick yourself up, dust yourself off. You know, tomorrow is another day.
Exactly.
Says Scarlett O'Hara, right?
Yeah.
No, it's all you can do.
Oh, that's beautiful advice. That's really good. Where, you know, just let go of this, if I fail, I need to give up mentality with nutrition. I think that is exactly it. Well, thank you so much for your time, and hopefully we'll get to talk to you again sometime. And again, pick up her book. You're going to love it. Thank you so much.
You're the best, Erica. They're so lucky to have you.
Oh, thank you.